The Shahnameh on the Silk Road by Professor Iraj Bashiri, University of Minnesota. Introduction.
Hi, I'm Iraj Bashiri, Emeritus Professor of History at the University of Minnesota. The course I offer is called the Epic Tradition on the Silk Road. I'm producing it in conjunction with courses in academia.edu. Throughout my career, I have taught many courses on Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. I also have carried out research and published books and articles on various aspects of the region. You can Google me or see my academia page or my web page, Iraj Bashiri, one word, irajbashiri.com. The epic tradition is one of my favorite areas of research. I am particularly keen on Ferdowsi's Shahnameh and the Kyrgyz epic Manas. This course is on Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, and I hope to develop a course also on the Kyrgyz epic Manas. The Shahnameh consists of three parts: cosmic, mythic, and historic. We shall cover all three parts in this course. The cosmic part rationalizes the near impossibility of creating a material world in which evil does not have a role. In the mythic part, monarchs and saint heroes protect the integrity of the world that the Creator has bestowed upon them, using their foresight and ingenuity, what is usually referred to as the Far. The historic part deals with the impact of the teachings of the prophet Zoroaster on Iranian culture. I don't think you want to miss this unique and rewarding experience. I encourage you to participate in the course. Let us study Ferdowsi's life and the stories in his fascinating Shahnameh together. See you then.
Caravans, campfires, and stories.
The words Silk Road invariably conjure up at least three things: caravans, campfires, and stories. Before they moved silk, caravans carried other commodities. They carried tea from the southern Yunnan province highlands on what was known as the tea route. They carried jade from Khotan, more precisely from the mountains of Badakhshan, via the jade route. Silk became dominant because, as a commodity, it gained universal market beyond China. In the long run, it created a route that stretched all the way from Chang'an to Rome. Neither was silk the only merchandise that traveled on the Silk Road. All kinds of commodities, as long as they were light in amount and small in size, were accommodated. Needless to say, they had to be extremely precious as well. Members of the caravans had very little to do with what the caravan carried. In fact, nobody knew what some of the merchandise carried by some of the merchants in their massive loads contained. All they knew was that their merchandise was destined for use in royal palaces and by nobility. So much for caravans. How about campfires? What do we know about them other than making them was a major necessity on the road? It is usually assumed that a large group of people carrying the type of merchandise that we discussed earlier began a journey in Chang'an, in China, covered nearly 4,000 miles of dangerous and lawless terrain, and ended their journey in Rome. It is also assumed that once their mercantile activities in Rome ended, the same merchants returned to Canaan carrying commodities from the west. In reality, however, affairs on the road were much more complex than that. First, the group that we refer to as merchants did not always consist of the same individuals. Neither did the members of the group have either a collective destination or a unified interest. As the caravan passed through Donghua, Khotan, Kashgar, Samarkand, and Bukhara, some people left the caravan to sell their wares in surrounding towns and villages. In their stead, people from those places joined the caravan and participated in its activities. As for the caravans, they moved slowly, about 20 to 30 miles per day. After a day's journey, they halted, and the merchant took the loads off their camels. After that, they made a campfire, prepared a simple meal, and tried to get some rest. The campfire burned all night amid anxiety and optimism. Anxiety because, like a beacon, the campfire attracted bandits. So, all night long, the merchants worried that bandits might attack and take their merchandise or even kill some of them. Optimism because the campfire lighting the scene showed how strong the caravan was. The light also helped the merchants defend themselves against bandits. There were also some times when the caravan stayed in a caravanserai. Now, caravanserais were buildings built strategically in the middle of the desert for the comfort and security of travelers. At the present, of course, traveling in caravans is a thing of the past. Sidewalk motels have replaced the caravanserais. Remains of old caravanserais, however, still dot the deserts in Iran and Central Asia. In the caravanserai, the members of the caravan could relax. Protected by walls and guards, they could listen to storytellers. They could let the heroes in the stories take them to incredibly delightful and enchanting places. And hence the third thing that the Silk Road conjured up: stories. And by story, I mean a vehicle that facilitates transfer of knowledge and exchange of ideas. Unlike the merchandise that had nothing to do with the members of the caravan, exchange of ideas involved everyone. Actually, some people traveled long distances with caravans, simply to stay in touch with sages who traveled from place to place with the caravan. It's important to know that those days knowledge was not packaged in the way that it is made available these days. Information was couched in epics like the Shahnameh or Manas, and in extremely rare books of advice. In this case, it was passed on orally to the seekers of knowledge. In this regard, the epic genre played a dual function. It opened the mind of the listener to realities of life that he unconsciously struggled with, and it warded off boredom that frustrated even the most tolerant of travelers. The accounts in the Shahnameh of Ferdowsi were the type of stories that almost everyone readily related to. They teach manliness, generosity, justice, and care for the weak in society. The Shahnameh itself consists of a long story to which a large number of auxiliary stories are attached. Stories like Rustam and Sohrab, Bijan and Manijeh, and Rustam and Isfandiar. What is interesting is that over the centuries, the main story has been almost totally overshadowed by the heroics in the auxiliary stories. The long story was appreciated and enjoyed only by those who traveled the entire road from Chang'an to Rome, and sometimes back. Neither is extracting the main story from the body of the epic easy. Some of the characters in the main story are shared with the auxiliary stories. The process imparts credibility to the auxiliary stories and, to a degree, makes them contributors to the main story. In this course, we will concentrate on the long story. We'll cover the deeds of cosmic, mythic, and historic heroes who followed the dictates of the kingly glory, or far, and who used innate wisdom, or khirad, as their guiding light in making life and death decisions. We'll see how they carefully organized the affairs of the people here below while remaining grateful to the unseen forces that assisted them vanquish evil. Recall it was mentioned that as the caravan moved from city to city, some people left the caravan and some others joined the caravan. These routine exchanges continue. One of the most meaningful phenomena on the road. Those who went to the towns and villages took the ideas to which they had been exposed with them. In family gatherings, they sowed the seed of love for the heroes that they had come to admire. They highlighted their delight at hearing about Siyavush and Rustam and Tus and others. When those villagers visited the city, one of the places they wanted to visit was a tea house in which stories from the Shahnameh were recited. They also wanted to visit a Zurkhane, or House of Strength, a kind of sports club where contemporary youth emulated the deeds of the heroes of the epic. In this way, the Shahnameh contributed to the vibrancy of the Silk Road, and in response, the Silk Road helped the Shahnameh spread its wisdom and knowledge far and wide. The heroes of the Shahnameh were known to the children in the smallest hamlets in the land. In the sessions that follow, I'll discuss Ferdowsi's life and the structure and content of his epic in detail. I hope you will join me in the journey. See you then.
Ferdowsi's life.
The Shahnameh of Ferdowsi is a major work in world literature. It's the bedrock on which Iranian language, literature, and culture rests. The Shahnameh contains 60,000 baits and 62 stories. The stories vary in length, attraction, and importance. In this session, I'll talk about Ferdowsi's life, and I'll provide information about the structure and content of the Shahnameh. Now, who is Ferdowsi? Hakim Abul Qasim Mansour Ferdowsi was born in AD 934 to a prosperous, educated, and noble family near the town of Tus in Iran's Khorasan province. He received a good education, as well as was versed in Dari Persian and Arabic. According to some sources, he knew the Pahlavi language as well. During his youth, the Samanids of Bukhara were promoting knowledge about the rich legacy of ancient Iran. In that milieu, as a youth, Ferdowsi developed a good understanding of Iranian history. More than that, he developed a keen desire to document the legends and stories that were prevalent in his society. When he was 30, Ferdowsi was dismayed at what was happening to Iran's ancient legacy. He was also apprehensive about the impending assault of Turkish tribes of Central Asia that were at the time moving westward. He felt he had a duty to safeguard that legacy by preserving the stories that he knew. He also feared that his knowledge, both about the legends and regarding the deeds of the kings, was inadequate and unsystematic. Fortunately, when he was 40, a close friend, a merchant called Abu Mansour ibn Muhammad, presented him with a copy of Shahnameh Abu Mansouri, or the Abu Mansouri Book of Kings. This prose account of the exploits of Iran's saint heroes of mythic times provided the framework that Firdowsi lacked. Gradually, he constructed a plan for diversification of the account in the Shahnameh Abu Mansouri about the legendary heroes and historic kings of Iran. At the start of the project, he was apprehensive that he might not have enough time left to finish the task. But his friend encouraged him to undertake the project anyway. In preparation for the project, Ferdowsi studied the chronicles of Mazandaran, Sistan, Balkh, Bukhara, and Khotan, and collected as many of the oral traditions on immortality, the divine right of kings, knowledge, justice, heroism, vengeance, deceit, and black magic as he could. At the end, he began the writing of the Shahnameh. It consists of the creation of the sacred land of Iran in the east, the breakup of the mythic Iranian Kulturbund into Iran and Turan, and the reunification of the two. He also chose the Far, or kingly glory, legitimacy, as the binding force to not only hold the legends and stories together, but also to make them vibrant and memorable. Ferdowsi's Shahnameh comes to an end with Daqiqi's account of the rise of Zoroaster, acceptance of Zoroastrianism by Gushtasp, and several forays into Achaemenid and Sassanid histories. The composition of the Shahnameh began in 975 or 976 under the rule of the Samanids. They ruled from 819 to 999. In the early stages of the work, Ferdowsi had a steady income from his land holdings. 20 years later, in 994, at the same time that his epic was complete, the Samanid dynasty began a rapid decline. As an old and poor man now, Ferdowsi looked for a new patron worthy of his Shahnameh. His search brought him to the court of Mahmud of Ghazna. After negotiating with Mahmud, he spent another 4 years to include appropriate praises and make necessary adjustments to his materials to reflect the realities of a rapidly changing time. Then he presented his epic to Mahmud. Mahmud's reception left much to be desired. Even though he had promised Ferdowsi to pay him in gold dinars, he paid the poet in silver. Ferdowsi held his peers responsible for this royal disfavor. He felt that in their evaluation of his work, they had allowed religious bias, racial and nationalistic tendencies, and conflict of interest to interfere with a fair assessment. There are also several accounts dealing with the king's motivation and reaction. Mahmud felt Ferdowsi had paid too much attention to Mazdian heroes and little attention to Turkish champions. He also believed that as a Shiite or a Rafidi, Ferdowsi had tried to weaken Sunni Islam, of which Mahmud was a staunch supporter. There was also, of course, Mahmud's love for gold. What is certain is that altogether, those factors resulted in the humiliation of the bard. In the literature about the Shahnameh, there is also an account concerning a satire that Ferdowsi wrote in reaction to Mahmud's action. But since the authorship of the piece to Ferdowsi is contested, we shall not deal with it. Ferdowsi died in Tus in 1021. He was 80 years old. They buried him on his personal property in the outskirts of town. He was survived by an only daughter. This brings our discussion of the life of the poet to an end. Please join me next time for a discussion of the structure and content of his epic. See you then.
The Shahnameh.
The Shahnameh is the celebrated epic of the Iranian peoples. Written in a simple language, Afghans, Tajiks, and Iranians all have equal access to it. As the bedrock of Iranian identity, it has safeguarded the integrity of the language, literature, and culture of Iran. In fact, over the centuries, it has prevented the Iranian polity from disintegration, immortalized the saint heroes of ancient Iran, and entrenched the rule of the Far in the social, political, and ideological affairs of the country. Before the advent of Zoroaster, the Moabits served as consultants to the divinely established monarchs of Iran. They had the last word in settling disputes among members of the royal house. When Zoroaster brought a new order, especially after King Gushtasp accepted Zoroastrianism as the official religion of his kingdom, the position of the Moabites was solemnized. They acquired a position similar to that of the state chroniclers. Over time, two sets of chronicles were developed. The first set was created by the historians. It dealt with the life and deeds of the monarchs. These records were kept in the royal archives. The other was a set of religious texts created by the Moabites. They dealt with the life and deeds of the Mazdian saint heroes. These chronicles and texts were preserved through oral tradition. Alexander the Great's burning of books, killing of Moabites, and effacing monuments damaged, but did not wipe out this body of knowledge. A long time passed. Then a unique dynasty came to power. It was called the Sasanian or the Sassanid dynasty. During the rule, the chroniclers and the Moabites were both the makers of recorded history and custodians of ancient religious traditions. Working in unison, they compiled a single volume that dealt with the entire history of the Iranian people. It began at the dawn of creation and ended with the fall of Iran to the armies of Islam. The volume was written in the Pahlavi language. It was called the Shahnameh. Looked at it in more detail, the Shahnameh encompassed Iranian lore, spanning the formation of the Iranian lands, the breaking away of Turan, the unending efforts to restore Iranian unity, the emergence of the prophet Zoroaster, and the wars of religion that followed the conversion of King Gushtasp to Zoroastrianism. Now, what happened to the Shahnameh in Islamic times? After the advent of Islam in the 7th century, the Shahnameh was translated from Pahlavi into Arabic. Abu Mansour ibn Abdul Razzaq, military commander of Khorasan and governor of Tus, died 963, ordered 4 Zoroastrian Moabits to undertake a unique task, to compose a prose Shahnameh in Persian based on the Arabic version of the Shahnameh. The volume they created is known as the Shahnameh Abu Mansouri, around 958. Today, only a small portion, about 15 pages, of that Shahnameh remains, and is treasured as a sample of 10th century prose. Shahnameh Abu Mansouri covers the deeds of saint heroes and kings of Iran from Caillou to Yazdegerd III, some 50 personages in all. Both Daqiqi and Ferdowsi use the framework of the Shahnameh Abu Mansouri as the backbone for their respective versions of the epic in verse. Daqiqi versified the part that deals with the appearance of the prophet Zoroaster and the conversion of Gushtasp to Zoroastrianism. He versified about 1008 baits about the subject before he was killed by his own Turkish slave. Ferdowsi versified the entire epic and included Daqiqi's baits in their appropriate spot in his epic. The Shahnameh of Ferdowsi consists of 3 parts: cosmology, mythology, and history. The first part deals with the creation of the world, as well as the creation of the kingly glory, or the Far. Ferdowsi says originally, before it was invaded by evil, the world had an ethereal nature. The activities of evil destroyed the purity of that world and transformed it into the material world that we have today. The second part of the epic deals with Iranian mythology. This is the most memorable and important part of the epic. It begins with the establishment of a rudimentary civilization. During this age, saint heroes fight demons, or in Persian, divs. The divs are fashioned by evil to help it achieve immortality. We shall discuss the divs when we deal with the Mythic Age. The most awesome of these demons is the hawk. Due to King Jamshid's arrogance and loss of his Far, the hawk took over the rulership of Iran for 600 years. He tried to depopulate the Iranian world, as did evil in the ethereal world, and like evil, he failed. His protege, Afrasiyab, who had blood ties with the monarchs, also tried to do the same thing, and he too failed. Afrasiyab's problem was that he lacked the Far. Consequently, he was defeated and killed. The cultural contribution of this age is the establishment of 4 national Iranian celebrations: Sada, Nowruz, Tirgan, and Mehrgan. The third part of the Shahnameh deals with the time of Zoroaster and the wars of religion that occur in the wake of Gushta's acceptance of Zoroastrianism. It is in this part of the epic that Ferdowsi adds Daqiqi's verses. The epic ends with a brief account of the events related to the historical eras of Iranian rulership. Now let's look at the Shahnameh today. Today, with the exceptions of a few relics, the historical chronicles that Ferdowsi used as the foundation of his epic are lost. Some were destroyed by the Arab invaders and some by the Mongols. But Ferdowsi's rendition of those accounts remains and underpins Iran's unique governmental structure. Unlike the epics of other nations, even after centuries that separate today's Iranians from the era of Ferdowsi, students at almost all levels of Persian language and literature can read and enjoy the stories in the Shahnameh. Scholars can edit and interpret the text, but they cannot change even a word of the original. This is contrary to the case of some other epics like Manas, where a degree of flexibility is allowed. The Manascis reshape events to fit the type of audience they are entertaining. This brings our discussion of the background and structure of the Shahnameh to an end. Next session will deal with ancient Iranian cosmology as it emerges from Ferdowsi's Shahnameh. Thank you, and see you then.
The Cosmic Age.
Our discussion in this lesson is on the cosmological aspect of the Shahnameh. Cosmology is a system of scientific, philosophical, and speculative thoughts dealing with the origin, structure, space-time relationships of the universe. In the Shahnameh, the cosmological component prepares the ground for the struggle between two adversaries, good and evil. As we shall see, they become the mainstay of the epic. Like Daqiqi, who intended to versify the historical part of the Khodaynameh, beginning with the advent of Zoroaster, Firdowsi intended to versify the entire volume. The content of the Khodaynameh, as mentioned earlier, had originally been passed on orally. Recorded history was added to the oral tradition at a later time. The account that Daqiqi and Ferdowsi used begins with cosmic times and ends with the 7th century when the Persian Empire falls to the Arab invaders. The ancient Iranians posed many foundational questions, perhaps the very questions that had been on their minds from before the establishment of the Persian Empire. In fact, Zoroaster echoes many of these questions in his Gathas. Who are we? Who are our ancestors? Are we in this world for a purpose? Where in the flow of time are we located? Are we inherently good or evil? Who is responsible for our well-being? Questions like that. At the beginning of his Shahnameh, Ferdowsi answers some of those questions. Regarding time, Ferdowsi states that the early Iranians allotted 12,000 years as the lifespan of the universe. The years, of course, are cosmic rather than ordinary years. During the first 6,000 years, the world is in an ethereal or cosmic mode. its state is referred to as Menug. More precisely, it is a world that is created, dominated, and operated by the mind of Mazda. During the second 6,000 years, the world is corporeal in nature. It is also time sensitive. Its state is referred to as Getig. It is a world in which mythical beings, as well as humans, can live. The Menok state began in a void, an abstract world devoid of movement or touch. Life in the Menok began with a thought seed that split into two antagonistic forces, good and evil. From the start, for 3,000 years, the two forces fought each other over supremacy and achievement of immortality. Initially, good was victorious. Evil withdrew from the battle and fell into a swoon. Taking advantage of evil's absence during the next 3,000 years, good created two things. One is a group of helpers to help him move his intentions forward. They are known as the Holy Immortals. The other is an ethereal world on which he could test the validity of his future material world. The following are the Six Holy Immortals. Each one is created with a particular nature and mission. Good intention, represented by the animal kingdom, mostly cattle at that time. Truth, represented by fire. Choice dominion, represented by the sky made of shining metal. Bounteous devotion, represented by the earth. Perfection, represented by water, health and well-being. And immortality, represented by the plant kingdom. The cooperation of these forces had the potential of sustaining the projected creation of good forever. Good's second creation in the absence of evil was an ethereal replica of his future material world. First, he created a sky out of shining metal. This was to be a barrier against evil. The sky was in the form of an egg. The top of the sky reached the endless light, and he placed the rest of his creation within the sky. Then, out of the substance of the sky, he created water. Along with water, he created its helpmates, wind, rain, mist, storm, and snow. From water, he created the earth with far-flung passageways, hills, and dales. The earth was poised in the middle of the sky. Then he created the plants in the middle of the earth. As their helpmates, he created water and fire in them. And he fashioned the lone bull and assigned plants as its helpmate. At the end, he fashioned Caillou, the first man, with sleep as its helpmate. Caillou is the first man who in later times we find to become also the first king. When everything was in place, good permeated his whole creation with fire. Again, later on, we'll find that fire is the symbol of truth. The function of fire, or truth, was to, like the sky, keep evil away from God's creation. By the time that God's creation had come to an end and was working perfectly, evil, who is innately merciless and destructive, recovered from his swoon. He was dismayed at good's progress and set out to destroy everything that good had accomplished. Renting the sky asunder, evil entered good's creation, and there he polluted the water, defiled the earth, poisoned the plants, killed the sacred bull, and killed Caillou, the cosmic man who was created to lead God's kingdom. The activities of evil destroyed the ethereal nature of the Menok state. In fact, the Menok state was transformed into a Getic state. Happy at the outcome of his actions, evil tried to leave the devastated creation, but could not. The sky had patched itself up. Thus, evil became trapped in the Getic world. As expected, the struggle between good and evil over supremacy and immortality was resumed. And as we shall see, it became a major feature of the Getic state. Our story could have ended here because the material world could not exist without Caillou. But be not alarmed. There is still 6,000 years ahead of us. Just about anything can happen to make life move forward. Ahead is the mythic world in which saint heroes and monarchs struggle against demons and demon-like beings. There is also a historic age that leads to the present day. In the next session, we shall follow the exploits of Iran's mythical kings and saint heroes as they combat evil to retain their kingly glory or their far and to pursue their goal of attaining immortality. See you then.
The Mythic Age Part One.
From cosmology, we move to mythology, a body of narratives dealing with gods, demigods, legendary heroes, and supernatural events. Iranian mythology begins with Caillou, the same being who, in the ethereal world, was called Caillou. We were told there that Caillou was killed by evil, but apparently that was an exaggeration. The seed of Caillou went to the moon, was purified by the sun, and came back to earth in the shape of a rhubarb plant with two stalks attached at the base. The stalks resembled a man and a woman, the first mythic couple. Now evil had to move its affairs forward against the descendants of that couple, especially against the ones who were equipped with the kingly glory, or with the far. So, what is far? The far is one of the most foundational elements in Iranian culture. In addition to being the symbol of legitimacy, it provides the person who carries it with foresight. As we shall see, prudent monarchs make their epoch-making decisions always after consultation with their far. The far, however, is not exclusive to monarchs. Every individual who believes in a single deity, who is just, who is brave, and who is knowledgeable about affairs. Every individual who is on the side of truth has a degree of far. What is different about the far of the king and the far of ordinary people is that the far of the king is the strongest, and it cannot be taken away from him by force. In art, the far is depicted in a number of ways. It might appear as a ram adorning a flag, or as a ribbon attached to the neck of a bird, or as a ribbon attached to the headgear of an Iranian monarch. As can be seen, life in the corporeal state is much more complex. It forces evil to fashion new and more complex beings than the ones that helped him in the ethereal state. Now, with that brief background in mind, let us begin our discussion of the Mythic Age. The first mythic man and mythic king is called Caillou. He is king over not only people, but also thieves, birds, animals, and genies. To distinguish himself as the carrier of the far and as the symbol of his legitimacy, he wears a leopard skin jacket. Caillou ruled over the entire sentient world for 30 years. Events in the corporeal state are not much different than in the ethereal state. The same primordial conflict that took place between good and evil there is repeated here. The cause for the conflict, that is, achievement of immortality, remains the same. In the ethereal state, evil destroyed a whole creation to prevent good from becoming immortal, and failed. Now, in the corporeal state, he continues the same conflict in a different way, with a different set of characters and a different setting. Put differently, evil still desires the far with which to achieve immortality. The house of Caillou, using the far, denies him that privilege. The kingship of Caillou marks the beginning of the formation of Iranian society. We can say Caillou is the king who moves Iran in the direction of building a rudimentary civilization. Caillou has a son called Shahnameh. He is supposed to follow him as king. But Shahnameh is killed by evil before his time. The kingship then passes on to Caillou's grandson, Hushang, a prince that Caillou had kept hidden from evil. Hushang ruled for 40 years and contributed to the prosperity of the Creator's material world in many ways. He discovered fire. His discovery is celebrated today as the Sadat, a celebration that occurs 100 days before the New Year or the Nowruz. He also discovered metals and taught his people how to forge weaponry, harness the rivers, farm, and domesticate animals. Most importantly, he exterminated the demons or thieves and ushered in prosperity. Now, who are the thieves? They are giant-like nefarious beings unleashed by evil. They are supernatural, nasty creatures with fantastic powers. They can change their shape, they can fly, they have horns, long ears, white nostrils, and tusks. Only their black eyes resemble the eyes of human beings. The next ruler, Tahmuras, capitalized on the success of Hushang and enhanced the Creator's kingdom by domesticating animals and teaching his subjects the proper use of wool and milk. His mistake was that he allowed the defeated thieves to administer his kingdom. Using various languages and science, the thieves made the kingdom even more prosperous. but more prosperous under their own control. After Tahmuras, the arrogant and self-centered Jamshid ascended the throne. He lived for 1,000 years and ruled for 600 years. Similar to the monarchs of the past, he added new skills like spinning wool, weaving silk and cotton, and extracting precious metals from the earth. He also divided his subjects into categories, four in fact: priests, warriors, landowners, and merchants. Gradually, he focused the full import of his fare on his own affairs as well as on the affairs of the country. He improved his own status by building magnificent palaces and embellishing them with precious gems. And he improved the living conditions of his subjects by eradicating death from the face of the earth. But then, ignoring the contributions of his God-given fare and the role of the divs, the demons, in his administration, he not only attributed all the prosperity in the land to himself, but also expressed a keen desire to reach the stars. In fact, he became obsessed with the idea. To that end, he ordered the divs to build a throne with which he could fly and travel to the stars. And the divs obeyed. They helped him astound his subjects by flying over their heads. When Jamshid returned to the earth, he proclaimed himself God. "I have eradicated death from the face of the earth," he said, "and I have ushered in prosperity. For that, all of you owe your lives to me. That makes me your God." Jamshid's subjects recoiled at such an ungodly attitude towards the kingly glory or the fare. In droves, they left the side of Jamshid and sought assistance from Zahhak, the king of Arabia. As a result, Zahhak arrived in Iran. Jamshid handed his crown to him and retired. Two important events are attributed to the time of Jamshid. One is the building of a secure shelter, a var, to protect couples of all species of animals against the extremely cold winter, something akin to Noah's Ark. The other is the establishment of the New Year, or Nowruz, celebration. Today, many communities in the world, foremost among them the Iranians, commemorate the Nowruz on the day of the vernal equinox, usually the 21st of March. As expected, the next ruler cannot be anyone but a protege of evil. Iranians did not know that Zahhak was a protege of evil, and that in order to become king, he had killed his own father. More importantly, they did not know that two snakes issuing from his shoulders threatened his life, and that to keep the snakes satisfied, he continuously fed them human brains. In reality, Zahhak intended to depopulate the country by feeding the brains of its youth to his snakes, a practice that was repeated every day. Every morning, the brains of two young men were fed to Zahhak's hungry snakes. If you recall, this is exactly what evil tried to accomplish at the end of the cosmic age. Instead, he created a world that trapped him within itself. In sum, in the ethereal world, evil's plan to kill Caillou failed. Will he be more successful in here, where his demons have to fight against saint heroes equipped with the kingly glory or the Far? 100 years after his inauguration as king of Iran, Zahhak put Jamshid to death. Towards the end of Zahhak's rule of 600 years, oppression became unbearable. Kaveh, a blacksmith who had lost 17 of his 18 sons to Zahhak's snakes, rose against the heartless ruler. He overthrew the pitiless ruler with the help of Fereydun, a young man who possessed the Far and whose father had been killed by Zahhak. After he was defeated, Zahhak was imprisoned in a cave on Mount Damavand. Under Fereydun's Far, Iran returned to normalcy. It became a prosperous kingdom again. Once again, evil's scheme was neutralized, this time at the hands of ordinary people helped by the Far. What scheme will evil use to destroy the house of Fereydun? In the next session, we shall begin the discussion of the life and deeds of one of the most memorable heroes of the Mythic Age, Prince Siavash. I hope to see you then.
The Mythic Age Part 2.
Now we come to the story of Fereydun. Who is Fereydun? Fereydun was the son of Abtin and Faranak. 40 years before the end of his kingship, Zahhak had a dream in which a child yet to be born killed him and ascended the throne. To avert the future calamity, Zahhak sent his henchmen throughout the world to find and eliminate that child. Zahhak's henchmen could not find the child, but unwittingly they killed the child's father, Abtin. Eventually, the child was born and he was called Fereydun. When Fereydun grew up, he learned from his mother that Zahhak had killed his father. To avenge his father, he joined forces with the blacksmith Kaveh, who had lost all but one of his sons to Zahhak. Fereydun and Kaveh together captured Zahhak and imprisoned him in a cave on Mount Damavand. With Zahhak out of the picture, prosperity returned to Iran. During the reign of Fereydun, the affairs of the kingdom became diverse and complicated. So when he became old, he made an epoch-making decision. He divided his kingdom among his three sons, Salm, Tur, and Iraj. He gave the western lands, including Europe of today, to his oldest son, Salm. He gave the eastern lands, including present-day Central Asia, to his middle son, Tur, and he gave the heartland of Iran to his youngest son, Iraj. Now, what led Fereydun to this unusual decision? Fereydun assessed how loyal his sons were to himself and to the country. He concluded that his older sons lacked the innate knowledge necessary to govern, especially a country that has become complex under his rule. In other words, they lacked the Far. Iraj, on the other hand, had the Far, and he could replace Fereydun at any time that Fereydun so desired. Dissatisfied with their portions, Salm and Tur conspired and killed Iraj. They thought by eliminating Iraj, they would be able to possess his Far. But of course, They were wrong. The fire cannot be taken by force. Manouchehr killed both Tur and Sal. At the age of 500, with a broken heart over the death of his three sons, Fereydun stepped down as king in favor of Manouchehr, Iraj's grandson. The death of Tur created a rift between Iran and Turan, a rift that morphed into two major wars. The wars of vengeance for the murder of innocent Iraj, and thereafter wars of vengeance for the murder of Siavash. Both wars were against the Turanian ruler Afrasiyab. Now, who is Afrasiyab? Afrasiyab is the grandson of Tur, one of the three sons of Fereydun. He was on the side of the good until he killed his own brother, Iraj. After Tur, Afrasiyab became the ruler of Turan and managed the affairs of Turan from his subterranean palace. Afrasiyab's actions strengthened the hand of evil. They gave evil a lair in Iran called Turan. Afrasiyab was very much like the snakes on the shoulders of Zahhak, only more ferocious. Ferdowsi refers to him as a dragon fiend ruler. Now, Afrasiyab's nature is revealed at the end of his rule when he becomes a vagabond. He takes refuge in water, and that's his most liked element. Afrasiyab's counterpart was Caillou, who ruled Iran for 150 years. During the early years of his kingship, Caillou fought the Devs, as the demons, and expanded his kingdom to include Egypt and Hammurabi. Hammurabi is modern-day Yemen. Under his rule, Iran expanded its power far and wide. Before invading Hammurabi, Caillou heard a great deal about the beauty of Sudabe, the only daughter of the king of Hammurabi. So when he defeated the king of Hammurabi, he married Sudabe against the wishes of her father. The king of Hammurabi invited the couple to a family gathering, and then, taking advantage of Caillou's trust in him, he captured Caillou and imprisoned him. Sudabe tried to convince her father to free her husband, but to no avail. Then she asked her father to imprison her as well, in the same prison where her husband was. Her father agreed. In prison, Sudabe took care of Caillou. Eventually, they both were rescued by Rustam. Sudabe accompanied Caillou to Iran and became his favorite wife. Evil, seeing Caillou gaining so much strength in Iran, mounted a scheme to take his fire away from him. He instructed one of Caillou's confidants to insinuate an idea in the mind of Caillou. The idea that, as the greatest king in the world, he should add China to his realm. The idea intrigued Caillou. He thought he could fly to China on a craft carried by eagles. To that end, he ordered his subjects to take baby eagles from their nests and to train them. He also ordered a throne to be built with long upright poles on its four corners. Then, when the eagles became strong, he ordered to keep 4 of them hungry for a long time. Then the hungry eagles were tied to the throne at the bottom of each pole. At the end, he ordered 4 large pieces of meat to be put at the end of each post. The eagles trying to reach the meat lifted the king and his throne up and took him all the way to China. In China, they lost their stamina and folded their wings. Caillou and his throne fell to the ground. Miraculously, he survived the fall. After undergoing a great deal of peril, Caillou was rescued by Rustam. Following that, Caillou went into seclusion and stayed there for 40 days, pleading to the Creator for forgiveness. Eventually, the Creator forgave him. Caillou's most consequential event, one that affected both his life and the life of his favorite wife, Sudabe, began as a simple dispute. Three of the king's warriors, Tus, Give, and Gudars, found a maiden in the forest. Unable to decide who owns her, they took their case to the king and asked him for a ruling. The girl was the granddaughter of the Turanian warrior Gersivas, brother of Afrasiyab. Caillou liked the girl and sent her to his own harem, and later on married her. A boy was born of this marriage. He was called Siyavush. As was the custom at the time, soon after Siyavush was born, he was sent to Zabulistan to be trained by Rustam, Iran's national champion. Now, who is Rustam? He is a heavy, muscular man, so heavy that when he walks, the ground sinks under his feet. His Rakhsh is the only horse that can carry him. In fact, he is well known for three things. Rakhsh is one of them. The other two are his two-pronged beard and the skull of the white demon that he wears as a helmet. Rustam is clever, resourceful, carefree, loyal, and above all, eloquent. Before engaging in single combat, he intimidates his opponents and fills them with apprehension. Some of Ferdowsi's most memorable battle scenes, including his battle with his son Sohrab, showcase Rustam's psychological warfare with his opponents. Rustam lived for 600 years before he was killed by his own stepbrother, Shagad. He won many wars and rescued many kings, especially King Caillou from peril. Now return to the story of Siyavush. He grew up in Zabulistan and learned the manner of kings, archery, hunting, fighting, and the like. When his education was complete, Rustam brought him back to his father's court. He stayed at the court for another 7 years before he was eligible to wear the crown of a prince. Eventually, he was given the rulership of Kohistan. At about the same time, his mother died. The death of Siyavush's mother gave Sudabe, who had been in love with Siyavush since he had returned from Zabulistan, the chance that she had been waiting for. And she made her move. She asked her husband to send Siyavush to the women's quarters to become acquainted with his mothers and sisters. Siyavush rejected the idea. He said he was not familiar with the harem protocol, but his father insisted. Then unwillingly, Siyavush accepted to visit the harem. The first 2 times, the herbat accompanied him. Sudabe made various suggestions to reach the prince. She suggested a marriage between Siyavush and her daughter. Siyavush was not interested, but to be polite, accepted. Then she impudently offered herself to the young prince. Siyavush refused her advances, and when he tried to leave her bedchamber in a hurry, Sudabe pulled on his robe and tore off a piece. She then took that piece of cloth to her husband and accused Siyavush of rape. The accusation shocked Caillou. Siyavush denied the accusation and told his father that he was innocent. Caillou asked the court Mobads for a verdict. After 40 days of deliberation, the Mobads decreed that both Sudabe and Siyavush should undergo trial by fire. Sudabe refused. Siyavush, on the other hand, accepted the verdict and rode through the wall of fire unharmed. By undergoing trial by fire and succeeding, Siyavush proved that he was innocent, that Rustam had been a good mentor for him, and that his father did not place any value either on his son's words or on the education that he had received from Rustam. Most importantly, he saw how his father had helped him recognize the handiwork of evil and to reject it. While all those things were happening at the court of Caillou, a fateful event was taking shape on Iran's border with Turan. The evil Afrasiyab invaded Iran. The invasion was a godsend for Siyavush. It provided him with a way out of his predicament. He volunteered to fight Afrasiyab, and Caillou accepted the offer. Afrasiyab sent his brother Garsivas to capture Balkh. Siyavush met Garsivas at Balkh and handily defeated him. The defeat affected Garsivas tremendously. He resolved to retaliate. Then, before the actual war began, Afrasiyab had a frightful dream. He dreamed that Prince Siyavush entered his pavilion and killed him. Afraid that his dream might come true, Afrasiyab sued for peace. The peace treaty was negotiated by Piran. According to the treaty, Afrasiyab agreed to evacuate all the Iranian lands that he had captured earlier and to send 100 Turanian warriors, mostly his kinsmen, to Iran as hostages. Now, who is Piran? Piran is the head of the House of Visa stationed in Khotan. He is also Afrasiyab's commander-in-chief and prime minister. We see Piran first when he accompanies the delegation that comes to Siyavush to sue for peace. Showing sympathy towards the Iranian side, he convinces Siyavush that he should accept the peace treaty offered by Afrasiyab. And being Afrasiyab's prime minister, he convinces his king that the treaty would place Siyavush's far at his reach. Now, returning to the war. After the peace treaty was signed, Siyavush wrote a letter to his father and explained his decision. Rustam took the treaty, the letter, and the hostages to Caillou. Caillou's reaction to the negotiations was unexpected. Upon hearing about the agreement, he became angry. He chided Rustam for his lack of sage counsel, then ordered Siyavush to either continue the war and bring Afrasiyab to his heels, or hand the command of the army over to Tus and return to the court. Siyavush refused both orders. He refused to break his word with Afrasiyab, and he refused to return to the court. Instead, he turned the command of the army over to Tus, and, as unusual and unsavory as it was, he defected to Turan. The decision to defect to the enemy tested Siyavush in a number of ways. It tested his devotion to his creator. It tested his deep belief in the power of the Far. And again, most importantly, it tested his father's lack of respect for the pledge that his son had made to an enemy. In Turan, Afrasiyab received young Siyavush warmly. He entertained the prince and introduced him to his commanders. The Turanians arranged games in which Iranian and Turanian warriors could compete. Gersivaz and Siyavush competed in a game of polo called Chogan. Siyavush defeated Gersivaz and humbled him before Afrasiyab. Once again, Gersivaz resolved to retaliate. In the months that followed, Siyavush stayed in Khotan with Piran, who pledged to help him. During his stay, he married Piran's daughter, Jarira, and sired a son named Farud. Later on, with Piran's help, he also married Farangis, the daughter of Afrasiyab. Afrasiyab gave Siyavush and his daughter a kingdom of their own in the east, where they could build a city. There, Siyavush built his own city called Siyavush Court. Siyavush and Farangis started a happy life there. In time, Farangis became pregnant, and the couple looked forward to the birth of their child. Gersivaz, Afrasiyab's brother, envied Siyavush. That was in addition to the grudge that he held against Siyavush because of his having defeated him twice earlier, once as an Iranian army commander at Balkh, and the other time as an exile in Turan in a game of polo. He bided his time for an opportune moment to take his revenge. That time came when Afrasiyab appointed Gersivaz as the sole contact between his court and Siyavush court. Gersivaz visited Siyavush court often and constantly returned with disturbing news. He falsely reported that Siyavush was in constant communication with envoys from China and Iran. In the end, taking advantage of Afrasiyab's apprehension of Siyavush's far, he convinced Afrasiyab that Siyavush, using his far, was planning to dethrone him. At the beginning, Afrasiyab did not believe Gersivaz, but as time went by, he came to agree with his brother. Finally, he decided to fight Siyavush. He stormed Siyavush court at the head of a large army to capture the prince. Siyavush refused to fight his own father-in-law and benefactor. Afrasiyab then ordered Gersivaz to see that the prince was punished. Gersivaz ordered two of his warriors, Damur and Garuy Zare, to behead the prince. His order was carried out. They tied the prince's hands and feet and, like a lamb, cut off his head. Today, tulips grow where his blood was shed. The tulips are called the blood of Siyavush. I'll stop here and keep the story of Siyavush's son, Kaykhusro, for the next session. Thank you for your attention, and see you then.
The Mythic Age, Part 3.
Now, Kaykhusro was the son of Siyavush and Farangis, the daughter of Afrasiyab. At the time of the murder of Siyavush, Farangis was with child, Afrasiyab intended to kill Ferengis as well, but Piran intervened. After the murder of Siyavush, Kaykhusro was born in Piran's house. Now, before discussing the life and deeds of Kaykhusro, a word about Sudaba, the actual instigator of the death of Siyavush. When news of the murder of Siyavush reached Iran, Rustam, Siyavush's mentor, became extremely infuriated. Sudaba, fearful of Rustam, retreated to one of the least accessible chambers of the harem and hid herself there. She hoped that once Rustam cannot find her, he will leave. But she was wrong. Rustam forced Sudaba's maids to lead him to Sudaba's hiding place. Then, upon seeing Sudaba, he took her by her hair and dragged her all the way to the presence of Kaikous. There, with the sword in his hand, he smote her. Sudaba's lifeless body fell to the ground. Rustam then left the palace grounds without speaking a word to Kaikous. Now let us see what happened to Kaykhusro after he was born in Piran's house. Afrasiyab ordered Piran to leave the child with a shepherd. He instructed Piran to keep the child's lineage a secret from him. Kaykhusro was raised by the shepherd until he was 10 years old. Then one day Afrasiyab asked Piran to bring young Kaykhusro to his court. On the way to Afrasiyab's palace, Piran alerted the prince to the danger awaiting him. Son, he said, in front of Afrasiyab, behave as if you are crazy. Kaykhusro followed Piran's advice. After talking to the prince, Afrasiyab was confused. He asked Piran if something was wrong with the mental capability of the prince. Piran explained that the prince was physically fine, but mentally somewhat unstable. Afrasiyab then decided to keep Kaykhusro away from his palace. He sent the prince and his mother to Siyavush, the city that Siyavush had built. Meanwhile, in Iran, Kaikous had become old, and the Iranian champions were looking for a new king. In a dream, the angel Surush informed Gudars about the location of the Far. It is with Kaykhusro, he said, and Kaykhusro lives in Turan. Gudars sent his son Giv to Turan to find Kaykhusro and bring him to Iran. After looking for Kaykhusro for 7 years, Giv found the prince and brought him to Iran. Kaykhusro, however, was not the only candidate for kingship. Fariborz, Kaikous' son, too, was seeking the throne. He was supported by the commander Tus. A contest was arranged between the two claimants. It was decided that the champion who conquers the Bahman Dej, the abode of evil, will become king. Kaykhusro, supported by Gudars, won the contest and was designated king. As an epic, the Shahnameh covers countless wars. Each war is described in detail with respect to commanders, troop arrangements, strategies used, and maneuvers. In this course, rather than on the physical aspect of war, focus has been on the cause of war. Put differently, this course focuses on the impact of the Far on the decision-making process. In the case of the Great War of Caillou, however, an exception is made. That is because in the course of Caillou Great War, 3 fateful changes took place. First, the murders of Iraj and Siyavush were avenged. Second, the fate of evil on earth, represented by Afrasiyab in Turan, is decided. And third, the existence of Turan itself as a layer of evil within Iran was destroyed. Now, returning to the Great War of Caillou. Why did Caillou start the war? To avenge the murders of Iraj and Siyavush. To desist from war, Caillou demanded that the Turanians should hand the instigators of those murders, as well as those who had helped them, over to the Iranians to try them and punish them. In other words, Caillou wanted Afrasiyab to give himself, Piran, and many other Turanians up to the Iranians to slaughter them. That, of course, was not something that Afrasiyab could do. Once the Turanians refused to comply, Caillou moved on Turan to avenge the murders and to eliminate Afrasiyab, his own grandfather. The war took place in 3 stages. During the first stage, Caillou gathered an immense host and invaded Turan. The host was under the leadership of Caillou's son, Fereydun, and the command of the warrior Tus. Gudars, Give, and many other champions were also assigned to the host. Before Tus left for Turan, Caillou instructed him not to go by way of Kalat. Kalat, he explained to Tus, belonged to Farud, Siyavush's son from the daughter of Piran, Jarira. He did not want Farud and his mother to be disturbed. Tus stated that he will follow his king's order. But in spite of his promise, when the host reached Kalat, the wayward commander invaded Farud's territory and, in the course of a long battle, slayed the prince. The murder of the prince led to the death of his mother as well. She took her own life. After killing Farud, Tus moved on to carry out his main mission, that is, capturing or killing Afrasiyab. To defend Turan, Afrasiyab had created an international coalition comprising of the Khagan of China as commander-in-chief, Qamus, the commander of the Kushan forces, Shangol, the commander of the forces of India, his own forces, and the forces of Khotan, led by Piran. Thus, when the massive Iranian army under the leadership of Fereydun and command of Tus arrived in Turan, it faced an equally awesome army. In the war that ensued, Afrasiyab's coalition defeated Tus with ease. Upon hearing the news, Caillou dismissed Tus and appointed Caillou's son Fereydun as the new Iranian commander. The change did not alter the trend that Tus had set. Fereydun too was defeated. Accepting defeat then, Caillou recalled the army. In Iran, in a gathering of the champions, Caillou chided Tus for his disobedience and humiliated him for killing his stepbrother Farud. Tus expressed regret for his wayward acts. On the Turanian side, emboldened by his victory, Afrasiyab moved his army west and made preparations to attack the Iranian heartland. Caillou responded immediately. He appointed Tus as the commander-in-chief and sent him to face Afrasiyab a second time. He felt that Tus's earlier defeat and his being humbled before his peers would be sufficient condemnation for the champion to perform better. Tus fell short again, and again Caillou asked Fariborz to take over. In addition, he also made an important strategic change. Knowing that Fariborz was not a match for Piran, he dispatched Rustam in command of an auxiliary army to help Fariborz. The addition of Rustam to the war effort moved the war into a new phase. Rustam was a seasoned warrior and commander. Having studied Afrasiyab's strategy, especially the contributions of the international coalition to the Turanian forces, Rustam devised a fitting ruse. When the auxiliary army arrived in Turan and joined the main army, Rustam was introduced not as Rustam, but as unknown paladin. The news of a mysterious paladin in the Iranian army spread like wildfire in the camps. On the day of battle, when the two hosts faced each other, following his strategy, the mysterious paladin, that is Rustam, appeared in the field on foot, an extremely unusual circumstance. Champions never appeared in the field of battle without their steed, especially Rustam. Nobody had ever seen Rustam in the field of battle without his rakhsh. So if the mysterious paladin was not Rustam, who was he? The foreign warriors were intrigued the most. Not knowing much about the mysterious paladin, they took him on. They felt by either defeating or killing a mysterious Iranian fighter, they would gain great prestige at home. But instead, one by one, they were either humiliated by the paladin or killed. At the end, when Rustam felt that Afrasiyab's position had been sufficiently weakened, he revealed his identity as Rustam, the new commander of the Iranian forces. As the new commander, he attacked the Khagan of China, Afrasiyab's commander-in-chief, dragged him off his white elephant, and held him hostage. With Afrasiyab no longer a threat, Rustam and the victorious army returned to Iran. In this way, the second phase of the Great War of Caillou too came to an end. Now, the only thing that stood between Caillou and Afrasiyab was the army of Khotan led by Piran. The third and last phase of the war is a confrontation between Caillou and his grandfather, Afrasiyab. It begins as a battle between Gudarz and Piran. Before entering the war himself, Caillou sends Gudarz to eliminate Piran and to force Afrasiyab out of his lair. We already know Piran, and we know the contributions of his 7 brothers and only son to the longevity of Afrasiyab's rule. But who's Gudarz? Gudarz is the counterpart of Piran in Iran. He is as dedicated to Caillou as Piran is dedicated to Afrasiyab. At the beginning of the war, Gudars had 78 sons and grandsons. They served as the backbone of Kai-Khosrow's royal power. His son Giv found Kai-Khosrow and brought him to Iran to become king. In the wars led by the incompetent Tus, many of Gudars's children were killed. At the present, only 8 of his children were alive. Kai-Khosrow, in view of Piran's goodwill towards himself and his mother in the past, instructed Gudars to persuade Piran to join the Iranians. He asked Gudars to persuade Piran to move the rest of his family out of harm's way. Before the two armies met, Gudars raised the issue with Piran. Piran thanked him and Kai-Khosrow for their concern, but rejected the offer. He said he was too indebted to Afrasiyab to abandon him during his time of need. On the day of battle, the two massive armies faced each other. Neither commander took the initiative. Days went by, yet neither commander wanted to be the first to start the war. Eventually, the two old warriors agreed on a strategy. Rather than allowing the two armies to fight each other, resulting in many casualties, they agreed on a battle of champions. 2 venues were agreed upon. In one venue, 10 Iranian and 10 Turanian champions fight each other. In the other venue, the two army commanders, that is Piran and Gudars, fight each other in single combat. The winner will become the commander-in-chief of both armies. As the chart shows, the result was a major blow to Turan. The house of Visa, headed by Piran, was totally wiped out. The damage included the death of 2 of Piran's brothers and of his only son, Ruin. This consequence weighed heavily on Piran as he faced Gudars in single combat. The single combat between Gudars and Piran is one of the most memorable handiworks of evil. It shows how war forces two octogenarians with much love and respect for each other struggle to kill each other. After much struggle, Piran succeeded in wounding Gudars. In retaliation, Gudars throws a javelin at Piran. The javelin hits Piran and kills him. Piran's death puts an end to the power of Khotan that, for centuries, had energized the demonic rule of Afrasiyab. After Piran's death, Afrasiyab becomes a vagabond king with nowhere to go. For some time, he took refuge in a cave. A Zoroastrian Moabite found him and tried to bring him to the Iranians, but he escaped and hid in water, his most liked element. Kai-Khosrow, who was by now with the forces, ordered Garsivaz to be brought to the place where Afrasiyab had been seen last. There they tortured Garsivaz mercilessly. Afrasiyab, unable to ignore his brother's cries, surfaced and was captured. He asked his grandson for mercy, but Kai-Khosrow would not listen to him. At the behest of Kai-Khosrow, both brothers were put to death. With Afrasiyab gone, the Great War ended, and Iran and Turan became united under the far of Kai-Khosrow. When the war was over and the two lands were united, Caillou went into seclusion. He stayed in his chambers for 40 days, praying to Yazdan, the Creator. At the end, he announced that he has decided to abdicate the throne. Following Soroush's instructions, he distributed all his treasures among his champions, and against all opinions, he placed his crown on the head of an unknown warrior called Luhrasp. Luhrasp, he said, has the Far. He will sire a son who will welcome a new prophet. Heed his command. Then, accompanied by his champions, he left for his new destiny. Before he walked into the white light, he advised his champions to return to their homes. Those who do not go back, he said, will perish in a great snowstorm. But only Zal, Rustam, and Gudarz followed his advice. After Caillou disappeared in the white light, as he had foretold, the rest of his champions perished in a great snowstorm. The prophet whose appearance Caillou announced is the prophet of ancient Iran, Zoroaster. We'll talk about his life and ministry next time. See you then.
The Historic Age.
The Mythic era ends with the appearance of the prophet Zoroaster and the establishment of the House of Gushtasp. Before Zoroaster, Mazdaism, a creed based on the struggle between good and evil, prevailed. According to that creed, the individual communicated with deity directly and personally received reward and punishment. Zoroaster reorganized the Holy Immortals into a pantheon of 6 spentas and placed those spentas under the supervision of a single deity, Ahura Mazda. A bevy of lower gods known as Izads assisted the spentas. The lower gods performed a dual function. On the one hand, they communicated with the spentas, and on the other hand, they communicated with the spirit of the faithful, or the Ferdowsi of the faithful, and guided them. In other words, Zoroaster transformed the direct connection with a deity into a measured and calculated hierarchy. Ferdowsi, of course, does not explain these changes in his epic, but he implements them carefully as he develops the lives and deeds of the monarchs and heroes of the historic age. The same method that he used when he dealt with the impact of the Far on the mythic heroes of the epic. Recall when Caillou passed his rulership to Luhrasp, he made 2 prophetic statements. One was that a prophet would appear and bring a new way of life to the world, and the other was that a king from the line of Luhrasp would accept that way of life and promote it. Those prophecies were realized. Consequently, today, we know that the prophet he talked about was Zoroaster, and the king he spoke about was Gushtas. In what follows, we shall briefly discuss Zoroaster's life and ministry, followed by a discussion of the acceptance of Zoroastrianism as state religion by Gushtas. Now, who is Zoroaster? His original Avestan name is Zarathustra. The Greek and the English call him Zoroaster. The Persians refer to him either as Zardusht or Zartusht. There is no unanimity regarding either the date or the place of his birth. The circumstances of his early life, too, are shrouded in legend, and mystery. While in general children enter the world crying, Zoroaster is said to have entered the world laughing. Zoroaster was born into a tribal society led by a group of priests and warriors known as Karaps. The Karaps controlled the working people, the farmers, herdsmen, craftsmen, blacksmiths, and the like in society. As a young man, Zoroaster took issue with the deceitful and exploitative teachings of the Karaps. His opposition became pronounced after his conversations with his deity, Ahura Mazda. These conversations began when Zoroaster was about 30 and continued for 10 years. In the course of those conversations, Zoroaster learned that he should advocate the worship of a single god, Ahura Mazda. He should teach that the world is the battleground between the forces of good and evil, and more importantly, that it is every individual's duty to assist good at the expense of evil. In addition, Zoroaster learned that he must think good thoughts, utter good words, and perform good deeds. He must avoid all those things that make other human beings suffer, including lying, tyranny, and oppression. And most importantly, when making a choice, he must employ innate wisdom, or khirad, as his guiding principle. Zoroaster shared those ideas with both the community and the Karaps. He hoped that in the end the Karaps would see the light, abandon their ways, and follow him. But the Karaps neither accepted what Zoroaster taught nor followed him. Conversely, they tried to harm him. At the end, Zoroaster left his homeland in the east and traveled west, preaching his doctrine. At the age of 42, he found himself at the court of King Gushtasp, who was fighting at the time Arjasp, the successor of Afrasiyab in Turan. Arjasp rejected the unity that Caillou had established and refused to pay tribute to Gushtasp. More poignantly, he demanded tribute from Gushtasp. Gushtasp listened to Zoroaster's teachings carefully and accepted them. Alongside Gushtasp, Luhrasp and Isfandiar also accepted the religion. So, who is Isfandiar? He is the son of Gushtasp and an ardent promoter of the teaching of Zoroaster. He is an invincible ironclad warrior prince seeking his father's kingship. In fact, Isfandiar is as much eager to become king as he is eager to expand the domain of the Zoroastrian creed. Gushtasp uses Isfandiar's prowess and zeal to his own advantage. To avenge the death of his brother Zarir, he promises to marry his daughter Humay to whoever defeats Arjasp. More than that, he offers to abdicate and make that person king. Isfandiar defeats Arjasp, but only gets to marry Humay. To receive the kingship, Gushtasp tells him he must expand the good religion extensively. So Isfandiar reduces India, Rome, and Yemen. But rather than giving him the throne, Gushtasp imprisons him. Then, when Isfandiar is in prison and Gushtasp is away visiting Rustam and Zal in Zabulistan, Arjasp invades, kills Luhrasp, and abducts Gushtasp's daughters. Gushtasp then releases Esfandiar. Eliminating Arjasp and bringing your sisters back home, Gushtasp says to Esfandiar, would make you worthy of kingship. After the task is accomplished, however, as usual, Gushtasp reneges. When you bring the aged Rustam, who has been arrogant and disrespectful to the throne, to my presence in chains, I will abdicate and install you as the ruler, he says. Ironically, both father and son know that the mission spells out death for the prince, but they carry it out anyway. On the day of battle, Rustam's blows could not disable the ironclad warrior, but Esfandiar's diamond-tipped arrows easily pierced through Rustam's armor and wounded him. Rakhsh too was similarly badly wounded. Rustam asks for a respite so that Simurgh and Zal could dress the wounds. Meanwhile, Zal, Rustam's father, learned from the legendary Simurgh that only a special double-headed arrow made from the branch of a particular tamarisk tree, known as a gas tree, could mortally wound Esfandiar. And that provided that both arrows are shot into Esfandiar's eyes. He also learned that the warrior who kills Esfandiar will die soon after the death of Esfandiar. To cut a long story short, Rustam, following Zal's direction, kills Esfandiar. Soon after the death of Esfandiar, Rustam too is killed at the hand of his own stepbrother, Shaghat. With the death of Rustam and Esfandiar, the Mythic Age comes to an end. Beginning with Gushtasp's acceptance of Zoroastrianism, the very motivation for war in the Shahnameh changes. Rather than for achievement of immortality through the Fard, monarchs endeavor to expand the domain of the new religion, a trend that continues until the rise of Islam. As for Zoroaster, he was killed by Arjasp in Balkh when he was praying at the Temple of Fire. He was 77 years old. Zoroaster communicated his thoughts regarding truth in the form of songs, gathas. These were simple yet profound songs to which people could relate with ease. The historical part of the Shahnameh reflects the historical events that took place after Gushtasp. In this course, we do not deal with the historic age in any detail. Suffice it to say that of the Achaemenid monarchs, only Darius I the Great and Darius III are mentioned. The former is called Darab, the latter is called Dara. In spite of the fact that many monarchs ruled in between the two, Ferdowsi considers them as father and son, respectively. The father, Darab, is glorified for his stance on the side of the right and for such innovations as the Pony Express, Chapar. The son, Dara, is vilified for his ignominious defeat at the hand of Alexander the Great. As for Alexander, because he burned the Avesta and killed many Moabites, some Iranians refer to him with the attribute accursed, Gujastak. Others recognized him as a good Iranian king. There are many legends and stories attributed to Alexander, and some of them appear in the Shahnameh. A good portion of the historical part of the Shahnameh is devoted to the major kings of the Sassanid dynasty, their revival of Zoroastrianism, their wars with Rome, and their cultural interactions with India. In particular, Ferdowsi highlights the exploits of Ardashir I, the founder of the Sassanid dynasty, and he uses the account in Karnamek Ardashir Papakan, Deeds of Ardashir of the House of Babak. He also highlights the deeds of Khusro I Anushiravan. He extols Anushiravan's sense of justice, discusses the rise and fall of Mazdak, and elaborates on Anushiravan's role in the downfall of the reformer. He also praises Anushiravan for his victorious wars against Rome. The epic ends at Al-Qadisiyah in present-day Iraq, where the Iranian army is defeated by the invading Arab army. The most talked about irony in this historic catastrophe is the name of the Iranian commander, Rostam. This ends our discussion of the Shahnameh of Ferdowsi. I hope you found it useful and entertaining. Once again, our approach to the epic was unique. Rather than on the heroic tales, we emphasized the kingly glory, the Far, and we concentrated on the events that shaped and reshaped the House of Fereydun. Thank you for your interest and participation.